everybody, welcome to Our Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, on a news roundup, we're going to dive into what's happening with Redfall, and also...
I've got Street Fighter 6 news because the Capcom president has some wild expectations for that game, and also a little tidbit on Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man, the remastered version of that game finally coming as a standalone experience, Scott Tilford. It's finally going to be able to be bought outside of Miles Morales, but more on that soon.
Josh, my friend, an update on the blazing inferno that is Redfall over on Xbox shores, or are they Xbox shores entirely? Case in point, the game itself, and a report from Windows Central's Jez Corden, reading into the whole, situation, we'll call it, with Redfall, releasing in a bit of a state, releasing a bit like something like Assassin's Creed Unity, or whatever you want to point to as your glitched game of choice, Cyberpunk 2077, whatever. A report by Jez Corden as to the reality of how we got here, how a first-party title could be released in such a state. So this is from Windows Central. Jez says, I've been told by multiple sources that Xbox was entirely hands-off with the project and that the game doesn't fall under Xbox Game Studios director Matt Booty's responsibilities. Right now, Arcane is not an Xbox Game Studio by internal definition. He also clarifies a few different times in the report that overall it doesn't feel like, I guess it's just from the people he's talking to, that ZeniMax or Microsoft realized just how much Arcane's reputation or Arcane's output is reflecting on Xbox. I don't think they fully grasped the whole, this year belongs to Redfall and Starfield, all the conversations that were doing the rounds like that. He says ZeniMax is still operating as a separate entity, for better or worse. ZeniMax has a completely separate process for developing and shipping games. He also mentions that, Phil Spencer's obviously looking after the wider business realities of Xbox, and he's not going to dive into the minutiae of every single individual game. So we kind of mentioned this in the, Redfall is a disaster video, but it very much seems like the case. It's the double-edged sword of, I guess, trusting those teams to turn things around.
Yeah.
And in this report, obviously, he mentions Halo Infinite. That was a way more closer to home example of something that maybe should have been looked over a lot more, also releasing in a hell of a state. But in this case, the real reason behind why this thing was a bit of a mess is because it wasn't Arcane's Prey studio. It was a smaller team that was still classified as Arcane, but also Xbox were entirely hands-off with it.
It's an interesting thing to mention that, Scott, with Microsoft viewing Bethesda and Arcane as almost a separate entity, because I'm very cynical when it comes to business takeovers, and I remember when Microsoft bought Bethesda, and they said in one of the first press releases that, look, we're not going to mess with Bethesda, they're going to just keep functioning, as their own publisher, we're not going to get too hands-on. And at the time I thought, yeah, right, Phil. Like, of course you're going to get hands-on. You just bought this company.
Philip.
The history suggests that you're going to do something with the company. But this report seems to indicate that they were telling 100% of the truth then, in that, yeah, they've just left Bethesda to their own devices. And that is potentially a little bit scary based on Bethesda's recent output. Of course, they've overseen some great games like Doom, for instance, and previous Arcane titles.
Rush.
Hi-Fi Rush as well. That is very, very recent. But they've also had a few wonkier ones. They've had, they've had Fallout 76, lest we mention that. They have had, the last Tango game, Ghostwire Tokyo, which, while not a complete disaster, was a little bit disappointing compared to the developer's previous work and subsequent work on Hi-Fi Rush. So that, to me, is a big question mark, because what do they do now? Do they get more hands-on with Bethesda and their many developers, or do they just treat this as a blip and say, look, we still trust you, carry on doing what you're doing, and then hope to God that Starfield comes out and it isn't on fire? I
just think the amount of conversations doing the round. I mean, obviously, someone somewhere was going to do the headline, is Xbox done? Is this the end of Xbox? Should Microsoft just get rid of Xbox? I saw that. It wasn't us for a change.
Someone. Sounds a lot like Scott Tilford.
This time, I didn't float that, even in the office. Not at all.
You didn't.
But there's something, if that was a viable title to go for, I'd be the first person saying we should have that conversation. I obviously don't think Xbox should shut down, but I do think that the sheer volume of conversations around, oh my God, Xbox sucks right now, whatever, that are happening, does mean that they can't ignore it. It does mean that they have to do something better going forward. There is all the realities of, or at least there's conversations doing the rounds as to when, Arcane and Bethesda were acquired, that Redfall was already in the discussion stages, that Xbox apparently weren't that in favor of the game back in the day, but they were very much sort of like, you guys believe in this? Cool, we'll just see what happens. And obviously the reality of the way it's come together is now very much plain to see. But yeah, I don't think you can hang an entire first-party lineup on one game, especially when that developer's track record, I'm talking about Bethesda, isn't the strongest right now. I also think that them as a publishing wing, when you were mentioning their failures, throwing in Dishonored 2 and Prey, both really solid games that barely got seen by the masses.
Well, that was the big Bethesda issue during its kind of peak years of the mid-2010s to, until they were acquired. They had these great games. They had Prey. They had the original Doom. And while the original Doom is really beloved now and eventually sold well, they botched that thing's launch by holding off on reviews reviews, so people didn't know how good it was, and just being like weird about the marketing of that game among many others. So they had these great titles that they were just, in my opinion, kind of mismanaging, and it sucks to see that Microsoft hasn't been able to rectify that through their acquisition. But at the same time, Scott, I want to go back to something that Jez mentioned earlier. It also blows my head off that Microsoft didn't see this game and Bethesda as a whole as like reflective or indicative of their first party output.
Yeah, how do you not realize?
They haven't had anything in the AAA space for a while. The last big thing was Halo Infinite, and that wasn't great. People all last year, both Xbox fans and Xbox haters, were saying, where's the games?
Yep.
And everyone pointed towards Starfield, everyone pointed towards Redfall, and they were delayed into 2023. I don't understand how they didn't view their games as kind of kicking off their year or being big flag bearers for the Microsoft brand. To me, that is just like a flagrant mismanagement and misunderstanding of what you have. Why would you buy these great teams and these developers that people love and then go, well, they're not really Microsoft, they're still Bethesda and ZeniMax.
Yeah.
That's something I can't quite wrap my head around.
I think they're so caught up in, we are Xbox, we are Game Pass, we are this wider, it's not about the individual games. Kind of harkening back to some of the older conversations they had about, it's not about exclusives, it's about everything else. We're competing with Amazon and Google, we're not competing with Sony and Nintendo. Maybe that's the general tenor in those meetings. I have no idea, but I would agree with you. It's ridiculous to not recognize how much momentum was behind Redfall, even if it was just potential momentum. People want to like an Xbox first-party game, even if it's a first-party game that you acquired. It stands for something more if you're holding it up. And also, what was the event last year where they ended on Redfall? They've done something where they were like, and also this thing, and it's not like it hasn't been showcased. It's not like a small little game. It's not Pentiment or something, and that game's phenomenal. But it's not like you're leaning on something or something's coming in that we weren't aware of, kind of thing, where you can sort of shrug it off. This was a huge deal.
Absolutely. I don't think you can retroactively say, well, this was just more of a hi-fi rush than it was a Halo Infinite. It's like you said, like they pushed this initially, so of course expectations were there. It was featured heavily. People were looking forward to it. It's like the biggest Game Pass game of the year, at least in terms of exclusives so far, of course.
Yeah, so far.
And people were looking forward to it. So I don't understand how you can't see that the optics would be bad if the game is a disappointment or it released full of bugs. Like I'm still excited to properly jump into it. When I talk about its disappointments, I'm purely talking about, at least from my perspective, the bugs and issues that it launched with compared to how the actual game plays or anything like that, whether it has the arcane DNA. But it's a really, really fascinating case, I think, overall, of where Microsoft is as this big publisher, because they own so many studios that it's probably impossible to have oversight on every single game. But them being
you almost
so
need
hands-off, you almost need something. There's a certain level of expectation that we had when they were bought that, Microsoft would have a bar of quality that Bethesda would have to hit across the board, so we wouldn't get another Fallout 76, or we wouldn't get a Skyrim on PS3.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether I'm just being stupid and naive, but I still am optimistic for Starfield. I still am really looking forward to that game. But everything that's happening within Microsoft right now in Bethesda is kind of screaming like red flag, fire, fire, fire. There's a fire in the studio, and I don't know if that's true, but I gotta believe that
the games are on fire.
I gotta believe that they're still able to put out something
weird.
Great.
Like other side of the coin for this though is that Jez's reporting confirms that or points towards the idea that ZeniMax are operating away from they're not being as heavily scrutinized. That's why Redfall was able to come out like this. We have had Starfield delays and everything, but this would imply to me that Starfield doesn't have the Xbox bar of quality applied to it, if that thing even exists anyway. This is allowed to operate in its own space, and they will release it as an Xbox game on Xbox Game Pass because it was the game that they acquired that was in development when the acquisition went through. So that's a whole thing for whatever will happen later in the year. Or one of the things that Xbox just did is announce another showcase for June, where there's going to be a Starfield Direct. They're going to get hands-on with the game. Very much a bomb, very much a salve to all the conversations that are happening, even though it does line up with the same showcase date from last year. So they kind of always do this, but at the same time, they could do with a win. They've had the CMA stuff, they've now had this. So we'll keep an eye on everything as it rolls out.
Well, next up, Scott Telford, we've got something a little bit different, but we're still in the realm of executives' decisions that I don't quite understand. Because
it's still the gaming industry.
It's still the gaming industry, after all. Capcom's president has been doing the rounds talking about Street Fighter 6 and their expectations for this game, and they said something that kind of caught my eye. They said that with Street Fighter 6, they're expecting the game to sell 10 million copies. Now, 10 million copies is a lot for any game. It's something that Resident Evil has struggled to get to. It's something that just seems like a crazy number in my head, especially when Street Fighter V, which admittedly was a PlayStation exclusive, it took that game, let me double check, it took that game 6 years to hit 5 million copies. It's now hit 7 million copies, as confirmed by the president. But I just worry when it seems like a publisher or a developer is almost setting their game up to fail. We've seen it so many times with quote-unquote worse publishers like Square Enix, who give their titles ridiculous demands to meet sales-wise.
And then sack off the dev teams.
And then sack off the dev teams and constantly complain that successful games that sold millions and millions of copies were disappointments because they couldn't reach the outlandish heights that they had set for them. I hope this isn't one of those situations, and the more I read in the interview, it does seem like they're talking about lifetime sales, so it could indicate that they have such a long tail planned for Street Fighter 6 and loads of content to come. But what was your gut feeling about this? Because I saw this and I thought, ooh, is Street Fighter 6 in trouble if that's what they have to hit?
I will say that me and Jules both said to each other when we played Street Fighter 6 at EGX last year, Street Fighter is back.
Right.
I mean, I know that they recovered a hell of a lot on Street Fighter 5. That game had a notoriously ridiculous launch where it was just a threadbare release, very much put out so they could supplant the esports tournament they had on at the time. This Street Fighter 6 is the most confident I've felt about Street Fighter in about 10 years. It's a long time. I mean, obviously Street Fighter 4 was a big deal, kind of felt like it brought the fighting game genre back a bit. 5 played well enough, but it didn't have the features. I know they got there eventually with the campaign and everything. I love Street Fighter 6. We're not sponsored by it whatsoever. I played the demo a hell of a lot. I love the art, I love the aesthetic, I even like the music. I love how confident it is, and they know they need to get it right. It's effing Street Fighter. How did you let it fall so far in the first place? I think they're playing everything right. I feel like people are kind of ready for this. I feel like the fighting game genre is doing gangbusters at the minute. You've got new tech and you've got new Mortal Kombat about to be revealed. Ed Boon out there on Twitter, very much just saying we've got stuff to come soon. So I wouldn't be surprised if they nail this. I love fighting games, Josh Brown.
I hope they can do it. To their credit, in the interview further on, they were talking about how much they packed into the latest Street Fighter experience. The story mode, the arcade mode, all of these extras that kind of make it look ridiculous in comparison to the content barren Street Fighter V, at least at launch. It does feel like they're making all the right moves, but with that added time, those added resources poured into the game, comes the expectation of huger sales. I don't know if huger is a word, but that's what I'm going to run with. I think it probably isn't too crazy when you actually sit down and think of it. Like you said, there's the appetite there. The previews have been great. People who have played it think it looks and plays amazing. You've obviously got the bonus of it not being a console exclusive this time around, so you've literally got more machines to sell more copies on. And if you get that post-launch slate lined up, people will ultimately stay around for a long time. I just thought it was kind of ambitious for someone to come out and say, no, we're expecting the latest game in this franchise to be the best-selling of the entire franchise. And that combined with the comparison that they've made previously to, I think they referenced that they wanted this to be kind of like for COD players, or is that another franchise that I'm mixing up?
That's Final Fantasy 16.
That's Final Fantasy 16. But they did say they wanted it to be more accessible, and you've mentioned that.
That's a
in terms of the
perfect
mechanics.
pub quiz question. Which returning franchise had the director say they want to try and get the Call of Duty market in? That's Final Fantasy 16 and Yoshi P saying they need to make a Final Fantasy for the Call of Duty fan.
That's interesting, isn't it? I feel like all of these installments are coming out, and yes, I've mixed up there, and I'm trying to save face. But all of these new franchises are coming out, and they're trying to be new entry points for those franchises. Like Final Fantasy 16 is going to be the first mainline Final Fantasy that I buy, so they've succeeded on that front. But with Street Fighter 6, it's interesting that they're also targeting like these more casual players and people who might not have picked up a Street Fighter before, because I think that's what its biggest competitor, Tekken 8 and Mortal Kombat 12, are really good at. I think Tekken and Mortal Kombat appeal to casual fools like me, whereas Street Fighter is so intimidating and I'm kind of cowering in its shadow, like, it's going to kick my ass, it's going to kick my ass.
No, they are definitely leaning into that as well, like with the overall presentation and with all the auto combo-y stuff they've put in there. It's very much an on-ramp for the IP. I think, if anything, the number 6 might get in the way of it.
Right.
But if you play the demo then you'll know everything is coming up. It's knitting together extremely well.
I have one more news story for you,
Please
Scott Tilford.
do.
And this is just a small thing. I wanted to throw it in to balance out the Microsoft news at the start of this video. But
things.
Truth cares. Spider-Man. Not gonna work, but I try my best. Yeah, Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man PS5 Remastered, which is a game that's been out for years now, but it was trapped behind Spider-Man Miles Morales. You had to buy that game and get the upgrade path to get it. It's finally getting a standalone release. And I just kind of wanted to throw that in here because, to me, that's kind of like been one of Sony's biggest blunders. It reminds me a lot of when Call of Duty 4 Remastered was a thing, and then Activision trapped that behind a pre-order for Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and everyone kind of shook their fist at that, but Spider-Man kind of came and went, and it was such a shame because I don't know if you've played Spider-Man Remastered, but it's an absolutely excellent game. It is really great, and it's exciting to see that people are going to finally be able to play that without having to buy Miles Morales. It's retailing at $50, but if you own Spider-Man PS4, you can get the upgrade for $10. So they're continuing that, so at least that's fine. It seems like, I just wanted to throw it in, that they're ramping up, the marketing for Spider-Man 2 in every way without actually showing Spider-Man 2 content. They announced a Spider-Man 2 prequel comic. They've obviously got this standalone release coming at the end of May, by the way. And I just thought it was an interesting move to do it now when they've kind of had this gold gem for PlayStation 5 for years. And now they're like, all right, now we'll push it out.
They will wait until the Starfield Direct comes out. There'll be a modicum of, oh, this is really, really good. And then they'll go Spider-Man 2 demo. And just that's how Sony do. So I guess we'll see what happens. If I'm correct, it'll be in June. Also, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the Spider-Man Remastered face. I feel like that was the overall debate back when that game was first showing off, and why a lot of people avoided it because they preferred the original face.
You know what?
Go on.
I like it now.
It's all right now.
At first, I was like, what are you showing me? What are you showing me? Get it away from me. But I've come round to it. I think it's really good.
I think cynically that they just wanted to have like a fake Tom Holland. Not unlike the fake Tom Cruise that's in the Minority Report game. But only 5 of you will know what that is. But let us know what you think down in the comments below of the various faces. And also the state of everything else that we talked about. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.